This is the Max Yao Leadership Podcast.
As leaders, once we're willing to accept responsibility, then we can affect change, real change. A lot of challenges that we encounter today are as a direct result of us, for whatever reason, procrastinating. Even if we say, I'm going to get perfect at something before I do it. Listen, there is no such thing as perfection, okay? So it's better done than not done. And the reason not done happens is because we overanalyze. Just go out and make it happen today. I promise you that more opportunities will come your way if you just execute. What motivates the average person today? Young people in particular. It's not what motivated them 30 or 40 years ago, and it's not even money in a lot of cases. Now, I have a hard time wrapping my head and hands around that, but I'm not in my 20s. What motivates young people today? Any idea?
Welcome to the Max Yao Leadership Podcast. My guest today is a well-known expert in the field of productivity and change results. He is going to tell us all about it. Welcome, Shawn.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to be here.
Excellent. Now, Shawn, I was really looking forward to this conversation. And before we get started, would you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Well, I'm going to do my best. I love what you said. I'm going to tell them all about it. So I'm going to do my best to live up to that as well. I have, for more years than I care to count, I guess it's somewhere in the ballpark of 28 years, worked with leadership teams, high achievers, and entrepreneurs throughout the United States, Canada, and some in Europe as well. And the one reason that anybody in a leadership role would look at, say, let me bring somebody in or a team to help, is always to see improvement. That's the whole purpose. That's why, myself and obviously our team exists. So I think we're 12,000 clients in. So I've got a little bit of experience, a little bit of a knowledge base to work from. And that's the basis. I've written a couple of books around it. I've also done a lot of research and study over the past 25 years, understanding us, human beings, how we function, why we do the things we do, when we do them, those kinds of things as well.
Excellent. No, I think when you just mentioned that why we do things that we do is something that I would like to come back to in a moment to learn a bit more. But can you, in terms of your background, what brought you to what you are doing today? Why did you choose to start in this field of helping others do better at what you're doing?
How much time do we have? I grew up rural. I was a farm kid, and by God bless my dad, nobody, he was the hardest working man I think I've ever met. But in his mind, he didn't understand anything outside of if you didn't have a pick or a shovel in your hand. And at 13 years old, and this will of course date me, the internet didn't exist, at least not the way it does now. And I asked my parents to write a check. I think it was $13 for this book, and it was advertised in the classified section of a magazine on business. So at 13, I was already engrossed in learning about business and marketing and process and systems and sales and all these different things that today are we talk, and it's become habitual to have these conversations like breathing. In those days, not so much for me. We got this book in the mail, and I read through it probably 3 times, but and I wanted to do something, and essentially it was a watered down version of management consulting. But who am I going to consult? The cattle down the lane? They don't care what I have to say, and I'm a kid. I was determined that I would never become an entrepreneur, and I moved from small town to big city, went and got myself a job and realized I was highly unemployable, and then decided I was going to go pursue this. And that's really where it started. So thousands of clients later, I've had the privilege of working with, everything from way back when I started, so the mom and pop type business, size, very small, all the way up to, to multinational companies that went in and worked with leadership teams, some in mid-management, especially when I started out. But so that's where this started. And then I realized that you could not have an impact without having listen, if information flows only one direction, it's not going to do anything. So you have to have engagement. Without engagement, in those days, you might as well go burn the binders. Today, obviously, word binders, everything's, is online, but that was really the idea. And so very, very quickly, I'm the only one in my family that went to school anywhere beyond high school and did some post-secondary, and I've got three fancy pieces of wallpaper somewhere that, over the course of time and how many moves you do in your lifetime, I think they're sitting in boxes in my basement. But um, that's really the reality of where it started from. And then I realized that not only from a process systems on a consulting on a broad basis, the leaders wanted more. And so that's where the coaching really started to come into play. So sitting down with folks just like yourself, where we said, okay, here's where we are, here's where my company or my division, whatever it is, but here's where I want to take it. And those conversations are still had today. Gentleman was in my boardroom yesterday. He's the managing partner for a an engineering firm. And again, you and I were talking before we went on the air about how it'd be a really boring world if we all thought and processed things the same way. Well, as you can appreciate, someone who is an engineer, and they have to be this way, is very analytical, very process driven, and that's how he sees his business. So being able to say, where is it that you want to take your company, and then work with that individual and their team to attain this. And I think that's really, for me, that's motivational. When I can get up in the morning and I can see the progress, and that organizations and teams and even individuals in their capacity, whatever that role is, whether it's president, CEO, VP, CEO, COO, CFO, whatever, the growth inside of that, that's what drives me. That's what gets me there. And then I started studying, like I said, a moment ago, why we do the things we do when we do them, and why we do the things we know we shouldn't do.
No, that's really powerful what you just said there. So, this podcast is for leaders, is for uh, corporate executive who want to, become better leaders, and as you said, take their business and their division to the next level. What's your definition of leadership?
Well, that's a very complex answer, or it's a good question with I'm not sure there's a definitive answer. I look at leadership a little differently than some, because it used to be, if we go back, 30 or 40 or 50 years, a leadership meant that your business card had a certain title. Having a title on your business card or on the company website doesn't necessarily mean you're a leader, or a good leader at that. Leadership is understanding the individuals you get the privilege to work with. Understanding leadership is understanding communication needs to be rationalized, not just flows one direction. Leadership is about being able to get in there and do those things that you expect others to do. Now, I'm not in any way. I don't want to be confused. I'm not saying you should go and clean the restrooms. What I'm getting at is, if for example, a CFO or CEO, COO, and there's a certain level you can't. It's much better to say, let's go do this, than go do this. Understanding that, if you are there to issue orders, you're not going to get the kind of response you need.
Okay.
Um, Leadership is about walking hand in hand and side by side with somebody, and I don't mean this literally, obviously, to help them understand what it is that needs to happen and the time frame in which it needs to happen. Right? I always say, from a coaching perspective, coaching is about walking hand in hand and side by side with you in order to attain what you want to, while collapsing time frames. And that same sort of uh, perspective applies when you're talking about a leadership role, because if we go back, I'll never forget this, being referred to the president and CEO of a fairly large publicly traded company. And I was sitting in his office, and his executive assistant came and knocked on the door, and he yelled at her to come in, and she opened the door, and he lambasted her because she'd interrupted a meeting, and even going so far as to use profanity. And it was, I realized in an instant, we had a problem, and the problem started at the top, and then of course went, rolled downhill. We all heard the ball rolls downhill. And I had the privilege to work with him, and for the course of, I think, 3 years with him and his organization. So leadership is an interesting one, but leadership is also understanding how to bring your people, your team, your company, your division, to a place where you start to increase productivity. And you and I were having this conversation a little bit prior to going on air, right? Productivity is one of the keys that we've had talked about for generations. It's a buzzword. And of course, the problem is when it becomes a buzzword, we talk about it, but we don't really understand what that refers to. Yeah, we say productivity means more. Well, that's wonderful. More of what? Okay. The average person today in North America and the Western world, that the average employee is highly productive 4 out of 24 hours in a day. Let that sink in for a moment, because the question then becomes, if you're the leader that I have the privilege to sit across the desk from, what if we were able to see 1 extra hour of productivity from every one of your people every day for the next 12 months? What would that do to your bottom line in the end of the fiscal year? Right? All of a sudden the lights go on, right? Because that's a reality. How do we define productivity? It's any action, step, or activity that moves you in the direction of your goal or objective. So what that means is as leaders, we have to have a destination that our team is focused on. Because if they don't know where they're going, how are they going to get there? Right? So this is the key when we start talking about productivity. What motivates productivity? Nobody cares about needs. Right? Let me back this off a minute. If you recall, maybe, I don't know about you, but I remember when I was in university, I didn't have very much. And, I didn't come from a wealthy family. And you start to understand when we say that we have to be aware of what we're doing. Did you know that most people today aren't aware of what they're doing? They get up and go through a routine. If we're going to make a shift and a change, we have to do something dramatically different. So if we take this all the way back and we say, in order for these people to want more, we have to give them more. And that's part of leadership. It's part of understanding how we're going to increase productivity. And it's also understanding that in order for them to go somewhere, us included as leaders, we need to have a destination, right? The average person today goes through life looking at the tip of their nose. If you got in your automobile, okay, and you looked at, in the UK, we're going to say bonnet. In Canada, United States, we're going to say the hood. If you looked at that hood or that bonnet, as you left, you would get into an accident within one city block. But yet we go through life looking at the tip of our nose, not down the road. And so leaders, one of the things we talk at length about is you need to be 600 miles ahead of where everyone else is. If you're going to lead, you have to anticipate what's going to happen next based on the fact of experience, knowledge, working with coaches and mentors. And that's a key behind all of this. So an increase in productivity is understanding where they are, those people you have the privilege to work with, giving them something to aim towards, and then breaking it down into bite-sized pieces. Now, here's where productivity takes hold. If I say to somebody who's a member of my team, this year we want a 25% increase in the bottom line at the end of the fiscal year, you know what that means to the average person? Nothing. To us, we sit and talk about that over a cup of coffee. It's commonplace. It's like getting up in the morning and doing your shirt up. You don't have to think about it. It's habitual. When you've got somebody who comes to work every day and works hard, that's not anywhere on the horizon. So what we need to do is say, okay, what are those bite-sized pieces that we can break it down so it's easily assimilated and understood? Something we can wrap, or they can wrap their head, heart, and hands around and execute on, right? And I think that's a key when we start to come down to the personal level. Instead of just saying, here's a directive, here's a memo, here's what you have to do or else, that doesn't work. And we live in a world today, post-pandemic, where the management style is dramatically different than it was 3 years ago, or has to be, or you're going to end up in some, situation you don't want to find yourself in, as I don't have to tell you.
Absolutely.
Right? And we still have today. I mean, I received a call, I think on Monday of this week, for an individual who can't understand some of the challenges that him and his team are having inside of their company. And it's this is based upon the style.
Yes. And I guess that maybe let's pick up this example and maybe any other that you come. As leaders, as you said, it's about understanding the people, and you want to understand the people because there's result to deliver. We need to get to a point. And increasing productivity will get you there faster, because then, if people are productive only 4 hours in a day, they're productive 5 hours in a day, that will collapse the time where you get to your goals. So where do you start? And when you identify that there's some challenges in a particular area of the business, and productivity is one of the issue, where do you start to get that understanding of the people and why they do what they do, and how you get them to do what you want them to do?
So let's go all the way back to children. Okay. If I don't know if you have children or not, but I do.
Right.
So I'll share this very interesting. Do you have kids?
Right.
Okay. So when they're little and they do something that they are not supposed to do, and as parents, we look at them, we say, well, why did you do that? And they go, well, I don't know. We say, did you know you shouldn't have done that? And they say, yeah. Okay. And interestingly enough, we take this all the way into adulthood. The largest gap in our lives is always between what we know and what we do. Now, this is not meant to be offensive toward anyone that may smoke cigarettes, but I use this as an example. Okay. Every single person today who smokes a cigarette knows it's harming them, but they do it anyways, right? The healthcare professionals that have this knowledge, and they say that every cigarette takes about 10 minutes off your life. So why then do you insist upon shortening your life when we know it's doing this? This is factual, right? It's not conjecture. It's been proven that this does this. Well, we do this outside of that. We do it in all areas. If you look at people when they start a business, we'll go back to entrepreneurship for a minute. The one thing that causes most small businesses to encounter challenges is a lack of clients or customers, because that individual who is driving the bus isn't really driving the bus. Because the hard things, it's hard to go out and get clients when you start a business. It's difficult to go pound the pavement and talk to people. There are people that are afraid to shake someone else's hand. For what reason? I don't know, but I was that one of them, to be very clear. So, at the end of the day, you have to understand where people are at and meet them where they're at in order for them to start working. And you have to be able to take what it is that is going to motivate them. What motivates the average person today? Young people in particular. It's not what motivated them 30 or 40 years ago. And it's not even money in a lot of cases. Now, I have a hard time wrapping my head and hands around that, but I'm not in my 20s. Right? What motivates young people today? Any idea? If I'm 25 or 28 and I'm in your company, what motivates me?
I see that with some of the children around me. They've got different aspirations that we might have when we're their age, because they're living in different world today, and climate is very important to them.
What is, sorry?
The climate crisis, as we call
Climate
it,
crisis, yeah,
is very important to them. They call it having some meaning in their work, but I don't know that at 20 years old, the meaning of your life. I think that's something that you aspire to, but you figure out much later in life. That I believe that. What would you say there it is?
It's interesting. I get the privilege when I go into organizations, interact with a wide range of people, including, some that, of course, are young enough to be my kids. So, and they're in their 20s. And I met with two of them, here a week and a half ago. And yeah, they're passionate about what they do, but they're also very passionate, maybe even more so about, and these are well-educated professionals. Okay. These are people that have gone to school and they have some education and they're doing well in life. But because of that, they're also in high demand everywhere. They could leave Canada, go to the UK, go to the United States, go anywhere and get work. So freedom, the ability to do those things that are important. Maybe that's travel, maybe that's experiences, whatever they happen to be or are passionate about in their life. The ability to be flexible in the workplace. If we go back just a few years, flexibility then was not what it is today, right? The more you can meet somebody where they're at, the higher their production becomes in most cases. Now, there are always anomalies and exceptions to that rule, but meeting somebody where they are and helping them to grow through experiences. When I work with somebody who's in their 20s today, I can't pull out a sheet of paper and say, here's your point form of what you bang, 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 bang. It doesn't work, right? It's more experiential than it is me quantifying it. They don't care about that. Okay. Even those who are well educated, it doesn't matter how they work, where they see the world. Somebody who operates more from the creative side, the right side of the brain, or someone who's more analytical and process driven, it doesn't matter because it's cultural, it's the norm. So we as leaders have to recognize the shifts and changes that are happening and be able to, and this is the key, create. See, in the past, everybody wanted to follow somebody. It's human nature. We wanted to follow a leader, a real leader, someone who motivated us, someone who gave us a reason to, not just I told you so or else. That doesn't work because or else means bye-bye in today's world. And I know this is harsh and direct and blunt, but sometimes as leaders, when you're playing at a certain level, you need to have these very tough conversations to say, if I'm going to succeed in my role, if I'm going to establish what I need to in this organization, I'm going to build, because at the end of the day, I still have to answer to somebody, board of directors. Okay. We have to shift and change how we view it. And when I hear and of course, these stories, I see emails come in and I see inquiries come through our company from all over the world. And the question that I ask when I start seeing these emails, listen, I'm seeing an incredible amount of attrition in our company. Why? Well, give me your input. Give me you're an expert. And the answer to that question is, where do problems usually start? You know the answer to this,
At
right?
the top. Mhm.
Every single time. And so, I'll share a story with you. A gentleman that used to work for me many years ago went and started a company. He built it up and he was doing a few $1 million a year. And probably a year and a half ago, I was out for dinner with one of my children. And we came out of the restaurant, and 3 or 4 doors down in this little plaza or strip mall was another restaurant. And this gentleman and his wife and their son walked out. And this was a gentleman who used to work for me, and he waved, I waved back, and we ended up meeting in the parking lot where our vehicles were. And I said hi, shook his hand, how are you? What's that? I hadn't seen him in probably 10 years. And I said, how's, we're 5 minutes into this. I said, how is business? Okay, now I want you to see this, this. A lot of people that are watching and listening know this, but we get into a place where things haven't worked out the way we wanted them to. We shift instead of accepting. Okay. And he looked at me and said, he says, my management team, they just drove the company to the ground. Always that a fact. Okay. Listen, yes, the management team may have been, involved or complicit in some of the challenges, but the reality of it is it starts with him.
Yes.
And as leaders, once we're willing to accept responsibility, then we can affect change, real change. Right? When we say, I've had to sit there and do this, you know what? I made a mistake. I screwed up. What am I going to do to fix this? Right? Now, some people give up. Right? Some people do things we don't even want to discuss today. And other people say, you know what? What is a solution? There are always solutions. I just have to do something different.
Absolutely. You know what you just mentioned is part of my definition of what I call self-empowered leaders. Leadership for me, it's about influencing others into taking action towards a common goal. And for me, the first step in order to be able to do that is to take responsibility for everything that happens to you. And, as a leader, everything that happens in the organization. And responsibility, sometimes people are afraid of taking responsibility because they confuse, or we generally confuse taking responsibility with being at fault of what is happening. Blaming people is easy, but it's not because you are not at fault that you are not responsible. For me, responsibility is the ability to give a response to any situation, and that taking that ownership is a starting point in being able to provide a response. So why do you think is it that we see that much lack of ownership around and in organization? Why is that people struggle so much taking ownership?
As time progresses, and I may, give away my age in saying this, but as time progresses, I find that less and less people at any level, including leadership, but want to take responsibility for a specific situation. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're at fault or accepting liability. For those out there that are worried about saying, I own this. And that's, of course, if you listen to what goes on today in the world, one of the things I ask people, especially when I'm working with younger leaders, and when you look at the technology sector, the Silicon Valley thing, you're dealing with some of these very young leaders, are you owning this? I don't know if you've watched what's going on with OpenAI over the last week. But
The
right,
business pessimism.
it's some interesting things that have occurred. And so one of the things when I have the privilege to work with some of these leaders who are in their 20s and early 30s, is asking some of the questions that you are. And if you're going to actually see the result that you initially set out to, and hopefully you have defined that and quantified that so you know what it is you need to do in order to get that. And there's some reverse engineering that happens throughout the process. So you have a clear understanding of what has to happen between today and when you do attain or achieve whatever that objective or goal is. But owning that if it doesn't always happen in the way you wanted to or thought it might. Uh, one of the things that's interesting, I remember working with a gentleman. I was called in by a company out of Dallas, Texas. This is a number of years ago, and they had myself and one other gentleman who was probably 35 or so years older than I was, and he was a little rough around the edges in how he communicated. But the one thing that he said, nobody wants to accept responsibility. And he said, if you watch it, it goes, and you and I just talked about this, going back to children. He says, go into a preschool and somebody knocks the cup of juice off the table onto the floor, and there's no adult in the room. When the adult comes in and says, hey, what happened? Who did this? No one does, hey, it was me. Right? So this is a human nature thing that we once we start to embrace it and say, okay, in order for me to, and this starts even from a personal commitment, right? Once I commit to myself, I make that irrevocable commitment that I'm going to take responsibility for and execute on those things that I have previously committed to, then I'm going to achieve them, right? Because I will do whatever it takes within the realm of reason to achieve it. The line is, I will do whatever it takes as long as it's legal, moral, and ethical. Okay.
Abs-
And if you look at what happens today from a leadership standpoint, a lot of times companies, and we kind of go back to the tech sector, the valuation of these companies blow my mind, right? And but all of a sudden that also means that there's a very significant amount of money floating around. And so when you're 20 something years old and there's a few $100 million floating around, I'm not sure that at that age you grasp or understand the situation, right? Never mind leadership when it comes to people and achievement and results and all these different aspects that you and I are discussing here today.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's so critical then. So if you were in your work and the clients that you made and all the leader you interact with, what would you say are the two or three most critical challenges facing leaders today?
I'm going to do my best to narrow it down to three. I think the first one is understanding when you step into a leadership role, and this could even mean middle management. If someone's out there today listening, and they're not on sitting in one of those executive roles yet, understanding something that in order for you to climb the ladder, you do have to take responsibility. Age isn't relevant. Experience isn't relevant. Those people that get in and do those things that other people don't want to do and own it will move. The second part of that is becoming accountable, and this is an interesting one because I've worked with so many leaders over the years. Becoming accountable to yourself. Stop worrying so much about who you're supposed to answer to, and realize that it's you first. This is a really, people don't like to hear this sometimes, okay? But I'm paid a very significant amount of money to come in and have conversations with people who sit at the top. Um, you're the one who needs to be accountable to you. Second, and thirdly, always remember something: the people you get to deal with on a daily basis, they get up and get ready and go to work just like you do. Just because they're not sitting in that office where you are, doesn't mean they don't deserve the same level of respect, right? This is an interesting one because you'll never meet someone who's in an executive role who says, well, I don't value my people. But what I always ask people is, can you define that for me when I'm working with leaders? What does that mean?
Yeah.
Right. And this is an interesting one. And I remember going and doing some work with a law firm in the United States a number of years ago, very large national law firm, has been around for decades and decades and decades. And some of the folks sitting there who had been there for decades, they didn't understand the value of the people who, had only been there for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 15 years because they'd been there for 40, right? And treated them in a way where, I wouldn't consider treating an enemy that way, but it didn't phase them. And it was basically, this kind of an attitude that, your the value isn't there. And I think we as leaders today, we see it differently. But I still think it's tough, right? Because the pressures when you sit in a leadership role are significant. And sometimes we get so focused in on those things that we know need, quote unquote, need to happen, that we become a little bit unaware of how we deal with other aspects of things. And the example I gave of the president and CEO of the company, a few years ago that I worked with, I don't think he was intentionally trying to belittle his assistant, right? But and he probably didn't even realize it in the moment, right? And I think the awareness side of things plays out very well for those of us that make a conscious decision to say, I'm going to be aware. And you know what? I've made mistakes. I certainly am not perfect, right? When I'm head down on the other end of the air and I'm so busy, I've got deadlines, I have obligations, whatever they are. Um, and I'll even look at my executive assistant and I'll say, hey, do this. Please, can you do that? Right. And it's small things. And people go, oh, Shawn, you overestimate this kind. No, I don't actually. Right. The level of respect changes. Right. When you empower, you talked about leadership. When you empower people and you trust them, it changes the dynamic completely. But if you micromanage, all of a sudden you take that away, right? This is why, when we talk about empowerment, it's indicative of a good leader if you empower. If you have the opposite, well, we start asking questions, right?
Absolutely.
And if you follow that process through where you have done not necessarily your job, but the job has been done through what you have laid out for your team, they will be the very best they can be in that role. Therefore, trust should be a given, right? So there's a whole lot behind that too, right?
Absolutely. And then, you mentioned earlier about the younger generation, coming to the workforce. And as leaders, we need to, just do just what you just described, which is empowering them and helping them to grow. How do you think leaders should go about, interacting with that generation and helping them become the leaders of tomorrow? How can they nurture that next generation of leaders of leaders?
This is a really good question, and I've been asked this a few times, and I'll tell you my own perspective on this. Um, I don't think you can try and change them. I want to put that out there first because, if you go back, I don't know about your parents, but I recall mine saying, I don't know what's going to happen, the next generation, these kids today, and they go like, and I don't want to be that person. So, you judging them isn't going to help. I think embracing what motivates young people today, I think, is the key. What does that look like? Embracing them, building those strong, powerful, and high trust relationships through which you can impart knowledge and skill and your experience. And for those of us that have gray hair, or perhaps none in my case, we do have a lifetime of knowledge, skill, education, experience. education, both formal and non-formal. There's no textbook in the world that can teach how to deal with situations when you're actually facing them. Right? I don't have to tell you this. And I think most people watching and listening, if you're in a leadership role and have been for that time, you face challenges as they have arose, and you may understand how to deal with a situation, but not specifically how to ensure that there are solutions for the situation. It may be a pragmatic approach, but that doesn't mean you know how the outcome is going to, or what it's going to turn out to be. So I think, that's an important side of this. The trust is big for the younger generation. They want to feel validated. Okay. And so being able to impart some of that. So there is a process and a system that embraces where they're at and helps them to grow into that, and I think is key. The problem that we see, and it is a problem, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on the negative side of this, is that so many folks, even in my own, my own age group, that have been in the workforce for a lot of years and have sat in the leadership role at the head of the table, so to speak, instead of embracing and wanting to work with some of the younger people, they basically take their ideas and throw them out. The old adage, "Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater," applies in this case. Just because you have a young person or people who may not see things the way you do doesn't necessarily mean that how they see it is wrong. And if that individual is able to achieve the objective that you need and want them to, they may not take the same pathway that you would. But if they do achieve the objective, doesn't necessarily matter.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's very important. Achieving the results, as you said there. And the name of your company is Change Your Results.
It is.
And why did you choose that name, by the way?
It's interesting. I found, and this is interesting, change comes hard for most people. We find ourselves in a groove, in a rut, and we become accustomed to a certain level of comfort, or we paint ourselves into a frame. And I found the only people that truly embrace change are babies in wet diapers. And so change comes hard. And why not, especially for someone like myself, as a change agent, as a coach, coming in to really, the company name reflects what it is we do on a daily basis. And it was interesting. I remember going in, and when we incorporated, and we got the URL for the website many years ago now, and I was actually surprised that no one had that URL. Subsequently, though, I have received probably at least 6 or 7 offers, unsolicited offers. Hey, would you consider selling your URL? And the
Absolutely.
answer is thank you, but no.
So if I come to you and I say, Sean, I want to change my results,
Mhm.
where do we start?
It depends on the application, but let's take this, and let's say I'm working, Max, with you. This is one-on-one. I'm coaching you in your role as a leader. The first question I'm always going to ask is, what is it that you want to have as a takeaway, a result of us working together, right? Because I want to know if I can, in collaboration with you, deliver that. Okay. And if I can, then we start to have the next, what are next steps? And the other side I'll ask too is are you prepared to do anything and everything it takes to get where you want to go, provided that it's legal, moral, and ethical? Okay. Because yes, I'm exceptional at what I do. And I have worked with some of the most incredible people in the world. Multinational companies, Fortune 500, 100, NFL, CFL, NHL, Hollywood, recording artists, mom and pop. I've worked with a very broad spectrum. But here's the interesting part: if somebody has the misconception that there is a magic pill, and they're going to bring Shawn in, and magic and pixie dust is going to fly out of his fingertips, and it's going to fall from the sky and land in their lap, whatever it happens to be in that particular instance, they're going to be sorely disappointed, because it takes work and it takes effort. And when we start to affect change, there is always going to be bumps in the road. I have in one of our folders, when I start working with an organization, I have a graph, and it's very simple. When we get started, there's always a high level of excitement, and that peaks at about month 3 and then drops like a rock, because change takes time. You didn't get to where you are overnight. So conversely, it's going to take a little bit of time to extricate yourself from whatever it is you happen to have gotten yourself into. And I think that's an important step. And people look at this piece of paper and they see this thing, especially with the straight down, and they're like, well, what is this? And I say about 99% of every single organization, team, even individual that I've had the privilege to work with, at about the 3-month mark drops. Okay. And then they start building, right, in a much more sustainable way. And that's always going to happen. It's a human nature thing. And understanding how we function, how people respond or react to things, always we start to understand that what, it doesn't matter who we are, where we come from, what our background is, how much education we do or don't have, who our parents were, religious affiliation, none of it matters, right? At the end of the day, we're still human beings, and we all are going to act in a certain way based on certain circumstances. How we're raised, societal norms, religious influences, educators, parents.
Absolutely. No, that's thank you very much. We've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. Sadly, we are coming close soon to the end. I've got a couple of questions that I typically ask guests in our podcast. The first one, I believe that leaders are readers, and I have a series every week. I share a book that guests in the podcast I've shared that, and something to continue the conversation. A book that has been significant for them. So, if I was to ask you 3 book recommendation, what would there be?
Well, first, I'd love people to go and get a copy of my book, Change Your Mind, Change Your Results. But I would say this, that's the first one. Anyways, I would say this. The There's one called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. I'm sure you've heard and seen it. I would go way back to Dale Carnegie, where he talks about influencing people. I think this is such an important thing. You can't build a business, you can't do anything without strong, powerful, high trust relationships. How to win friends and influence people. And I I think there's a third one in there by Bob Proctor, and it's called You Were Born Rich.
Yeah. Well, I love all the books that you recommended. And I think I encourage everybody to pick your book, Change Your Mind, Change Your Results. Is there anything, I think we touched a lot on our conversation earlier on what you described in the book, but is there anything that you maybe want to highlight from your book that we haven't covered today?
Yeah, something, I think this is important. Uh, Truly successful people make near instant decisions and rarely, if ever, change their minds. So when you are faced with an opportunity, you already know deep down in places you don't talk about at parties that you want to do it, that you need to do it, that it's going to benefit you. Instead of over analyzing, we've heard the term analysis by paralysis. And we dissect it till it's unrecognizable and there's no longer an opportunity.
You don't have to talk
Just
about
jump,
me.
no, no, no. Jump off. Bob Proctor used to tell me, Shawn, jump off the building and grow wings on the way down. And I don't want to admonish anyone to do that literally, but it's the idea of actually taking that risk.
Yeah.
Yes, I know it's tough, but I strongly urge you to do that.
Yeah. No, that's a great advice. Absolutely. And I think that's something that, more and more we get adverse to risk, risk taking. And in fact, you talked a lot about how we grew up when we're going back as we were children. And in fact, you just have to turn back on your life to see that you used to take risk. And it's about going back to that place and bring that in today's. So thank you very much for sharing this.
Thank you for having me on.
I've got one question I like to ask guests typically, which is, you do a lot of interviews, you have been in a lot of shows, and what is one question that you wish I had asked you today, and how would you have?
So I used to have a radio show for years and years, across North America, US and Canada. And the one question that I used to always ask at the end of every show is what is and very people do this. I one or two interviews where people ask this at the end of the show, but I'll share this. What is one thing to all the guests I had that you can give our listeners, in this case, watching, that they can take and implement today that's going to make a difference?
So what that is?
There's a lot of things for a lot of people, but I'll say this, and it kind of goes back to what I said a moment ago: is speed of implementation.
Mhm.
A lot of challenges that we encounter today are as a direct result of us, for whatever reason, procrastinating. Even if we say I'm going to get perfect at something before I do it, listen, there is no such thing as perfection. Okay, so it's better done than not done, and the reason not done happens is because we overanalyze. Just go out and make it happen today. I promise you that more opportunities will come your way if you just execute.
I agree. What is it that we do procrastinate then? Coming back to why we do what we do.
Say that again, if you would.
Why do we procrastinate?
That's a good question, and I don't think there's a an answer that I can quantify that applies to every single person. But human nature is this: if we have something that we enjoy doing, we are going to do it without prompting. And we all have those things in our careers, our businesses. We all have those things that we thrive on doing. But we also conversely have those things that we don't want to do. And they typically get relegated to the other side of the desk. They get hidden somewhere behind a stack of paperwork. And what then happens is, and this is a human nature, an interesting component of us. If we don't address it before the end of the day, what happens is it turns into fires. And then our role as a leader is compromised because we become firefighters rather than leaders. And when you see companies in a challenging position, a lot of times this is where it started. Because if our time is invested in putting out fires rather than leading, what happens to our company? What happens to our division? What happens to our team?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Shawn. And as we come to the end of our conversation, where would our audience be able to find you if they want to reach out to you?
Thank you for that. You can go to changeyourresults.com. And another thing too, if there's anyone today who wants to actually go out and have an impact and do some of the things that I get the privilege to do, there is something we just launched that's been in the works for 4 years. It's called Line Factor Coaching, and it's linefactorcoaching.com. Take a look at it.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Very
Max. It's
pleasure
been a
having you.
pleasure.
This was the Max Yao Leadership Podcast. Thank you for joining us. To listen to future episodes, you can subscribe on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. Until next time, keep being the leader everybody trusts and respects.